When a man returns to his childhood home many years later, he quickly discovers that his former bastion of joy has turned into a fortress of evil. As he and others are attacked by dark, supernatural manifestations, will they survive, or will they be dragged down into the depths of hell itself? This is the untold story of the Corvo family haunting, also known as the Well to Hell case, which you'll soon understand why that is. And this story, like so many others here on the channel, is not one I would recommend that you watch alone or in the dark, unless you enjoy a challenge. Now, let us begin. Cromwell, Connecticut, a place known for picturesque beauty and its traditional suburban lifestyle. However, tucked away behind these ideal neighborhoods lies a darkness that seems to flow wherever the Connecticut River runs. Our story begins here in 2011. A man named Mark Corvo had just inherited his childhood home. Sadly, his parents had passed away recently and had left him an old, one-of-a-kind Victorian house. Deciding to move back to town and to take over the house, he now found himself upon its front porch. As he begins moving his boxes of things inside the house, a flood of memories came with them. His family, who was Italian, used to always hold family gatherings here, which, alongside his fond childhood memories, made the entire situation bittersweet. Mark plans on renting rooms within the home, but first needs to handle some cosmetic updates to the house. As he begins painting the first night he moves in to get a head start on things, little did he know that in this large house, he may not be as alone as he thinks. As he brushes paint onto the walls in one of the rooms, Mark begins to hear what he thinks are footsteps resonating from elsewhere in the house. Almost as soon as his attention shifts away from his brush and towards the noise, as he glances over to the door and towards the hallway, the door to the room suddenly slams shut completely on its own. Startled and thinking that perhaps someone had seen him move in and was playing a prank on him, he rushes into the hallway and begins a sweep of the house. However, after several minutes, he finds no one. Unsure of what to think about the strangeness he had just experienced, and perhaps rationalizing things in his mind, he decides to go ahead and lay down for bed that night. However, little did he know that the events of this night perhaps wouldn't be the last. Over the course of 3 to 4 weeks, Mark gets the side of the house where the rooms will be where he wants it, and starts advertising several rooms for rent. The first man who decides to do a walkthrough with him as a potential renter is a local fireman by the name of Sean Angus. Sean, who had just become a fireman at that time, was still living with his mother and wanted to get out and start living his own life. The home was near both his family as well as the fire station that he worked at, so after taking a look around, he decided to become Mark's first tenant. Shortly after Sean, Mark has another person who rents another room within the house, a woman who had just moved to the area, whose name was Ashley. With several tenants now in place, Mark shifts his focus back onto his continued restoration efforts in other parts of the house. One afternoon, he's fixing things up within the basement of the home when Sean, who was off work that day, offers to assist him. As Mark steps away to grab a tool, Sean can't help but notice a large, circular object covered with a tarp towards the center of the room. He cautiously begins to approach it, and slowly uncovering it, he exposes a well opening. As he glances into its depths, he sees nothing but darkness below, and a strange feeling as if someone or something is hiding down there grips him. As Mark returns, he notices Sean observing the well, and tells him that it's been there as long as he can remember. With the home having been built in 1741, it was long abandoned before he ever grew up there. The two would then continue their work. Later that evening, as wind blew through the trees outside, and the residents within the home were heading to bed, something unseen was watching them all from the shadows. Shortly after dozing off, Mark is suddenly woken up by the sound of heavy footsteps and bangs. Thinking that perhaps it was the home just making noises naturally as a result of being old, he writes them off. However, he's not the only one who hears them. Over the weeks to come, he is approached and has several conversations with both Sean and Ashley regarding the sounds within the house, particularly those of that first night. While Sean understands and thinks that it could just be the age of the home as well, despite his inner voice telling him otherwise, Ashley believes that it could be something very different. She comes to her own conclusion that the home is haunted. In Mark's own words, she would tell me often that there was a lot of activity at night, that she had seen this or that. I didn't minimize it, but I didn't really give it the full credence that I probably should have. As a result of this conviction, Ashley begins studying the paranormal and attempts to find a way to make herself feel safe while living in the house. Several weeks after these series of conversations, Mark is doing some yard work when he's suddenly startled at the sight of smoke emerging from Ashley's room in the house. Terrified that she was in danger and that the home was on fire, as smoke billows out the window, he drops everything and rushes to her aid. As he enters and runs into the house, he finds himself at the front of her door and begins banging on it frantically. He's able to shoulder it open, and when he does, he comes face to face with the source of the smoke. However, it's not what he expected. Instead of flames licking the walls, he instead sees Ashley fanning a bundle of herbs and wandering the room. She's completely unfazed by his presence, almost as if she's in a trance. It takes several seconds, but Mark finally is able to get her attention. She explains that she was a white witch and that she was attempting to cleanse her space because she didn't feel safe, that there were malevolent forces within the house. Although the concept is completely alien to Mark, he's able to calm down and doesn't care what she does as long as she didn't catch the house on fire and remained safe. Ashley then tells him that she's taking a trip to New Orleans and that a friend of hers was going to be staying at her apartment. Mark, of course, agreed and wished her well on her trip. Several days later, when Ashley departs, her friend Sadra arrives to stay, and little did she know that she would not be the only guest that night. As the sky darkened in the dead of night, lightning flashed and rain began to pelt the old colonial. All the while, Sadra was asleep in her friend's bed. She is suddenly ripped out of her dream state when the blankets are suddenly torn off of her body. Upon frantically glancing around trying to discover the source, she sees nothing. Then, multiple drawers on nearby dressers begin to open and close simultaneously, with no one there to see. Screaming in pure terror, she runs out of the house and into the pouring rain. The next day, she returns to the house, but only to give Mark his key. She accuses him of running some kind of scam, or that he had something to do with what had happened to her the night before. Mark takes the key, but is very confused. As she leaves the premises, never to be seen again, Mark begins to wonder if my tenants, their friends, and I have all heard and experienced different things, that perhaps there was something going on here, something that he couldn't understand, and whatever it was becoming alarming. In the days following these events, Ashley would return from her trip to New Orleans, and accompanying her were two friends that she had made along the trip. Mark, upon greeting her and meeting her friends, respected her right to have guests within her apartment. However, In later interviews, he would explain that something seemed off about both of them, and that Ashley's demeanor and energy seemed much darker in comparison to when she had left. Little did he know, however, just what their intentions truly were. Ashley's friends were originally from Haiti and were practitioners of a form of witchcraft or voodoo that originates there. That night, after the sun goes down and the moon rises above, the trio would make their way into the attic of the house. Once there, they began setting up for a ritual. The objective of their ritual was to try and contact the spirits Ashley had told them were within the house and to banish them using various offerings. Within the attic, an electric charge seemed to permeate the very air that they all breathed. After several minutes of chants, the ritual is complete. The group believed they were successful, but were they? The next morning, the Haitian men would leave, and Ashley nervously told Mark about what they had done. She told him that in order to banish the spirits, that they had offered many things. And one stipulation was that if Mark ever sold the house, that if the ownership ever left his bloodline, that he would die. Following that day, Ashley seemed to become more and more paranoid. She had come to believe that she too had been offered to the spirits, and that she was now in a fight for the sake of her very soul. In Mark's words, she told me that if the spirits within the house still remained, that she believed that they were evil and were growing stronger. She began burning sage on a daily basis, among other things, and soon appears to be in a constant state of distress. One day shortly after the events, she seems to finally crack under the pressure of it all. In a dramatic fashion, she frantically departed midday after telling Mark that she couldn't take it anymore. She then disappeared back out into the world, and he would never see or hear from her again. What further proved to him that she truly believed what she had been saying was that she had left all of her things behind. Confused and concerned, Mark takes a step back and tries to make sense of it all. How could this childhood wonderland from his memories have become such a hellscape? Could there truly be something evil lurking within its walls? Only time would tell. Now that Ashley was gone, Mark, his tenant Sean, and Sean's girlfriend Jessica remained in the house. One night, as a turbulent thunderstorm raged outside, another kind of storm was brewing within. As a series of lightning flashes light up the room, Jessica is woken up by a burst of thunder. As her eyes circle the room, she tries to regain her comfort and go back to bed. A door within their apartment suddenly opens. There, seemingly phased between the door and their room, is an apparition of a creature. Terrified, Jessica tries to wake Sean, but he won't budge. Entering fight or flight mode and not wanting to stick around to see whatever this thing was, she runs out of the apartment and out of the house into the pouring rain. She frantically gets into her car and starts it up. As she's getting ready to depart, Sean suddenly runs towards her car and asks her just what was going on. Upon telling him, he believes that she was dreaming, but she says that she knows what she saw, and she decides to leave. The following morning, she calls him and tells him that she will never again step foot into that house. As a result of this, Sean decides to tell Mark that in order to make his relationship work, that he was going to have to find them another place to live, and he then spends the afternoon moving their things out. Upset and truly concerned now given how much had taken place within the house to others, Mark decides to do some research of his own online and decides that he'll try and investigate what was happening himself. He didn't want to try and bring anyone else, such as other tenants, into the situation if he was just walking them into an infestation of sorts. So, with deciding to try and gather evidence such as EVPs or electronic voice phenomena, He begins alone, but will he be successful in his endeavors? With a digital recorder in hand, Mark goes room by room, asking probing questions to whatever forces may be lurking there. Upon entering the attic, he finds the symbols the Haitian men had drawn on the planks of wood overhead, and soon finds a strange altar as well. There, upon a symbol etched in chalk, was the carcass of a dead bird and a wooden cross, along with an empty alcohol bottle. He now believes that if there were spirits within the house, that they may have been stirred up due to these strange practices, or even worse, something evil could have been conjured. In the days and nights that follow, Mark continues to ask the presence within the home questions in hopes of getting proof of their existence on his digital recorder. He wasn't having any luck, but that was until one night when he entered the basement. As he walked around the room, questioning, and came feet within the well there, he hears something that chills him to the bone. Suddenly, as if there was someone or something trapped within, he hears a rapturous scream come from deep down inside the well. In Mark's words, "It was in that moment that I knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that my home was haunted." As he calls out into the shadows, asking just what they wanted, he begins to hear a strange language, the likes of which he doesn't recognize. Knowing now that he was in serious trouble with what was in the house, he seeks professional help with figuring the whole situation out. Mark ends up making contact with a paranormal research group known as the Ghosts of New England Research Society. He speaks with a man named Kurt Knapp, who himself has quite a unique history. As a former police officer turned paranormal investigator, he brings a degree of legitimacy and a thorough eye to investigating cases. Concerned with how distressed Mark seemed to be at the situation he was experiencing and wanting to first and foremost determine if the haunting was genuine, the two arrange for a meeting. Within days, Kurt is sitting in Mark's kitchen discussing just what all had taken place there. In Kurt's own words, "In police work, they tell you that if someone isn't telling the truth, that their story will begin to change in about an hour or so after they start talking." Mark was as genuine in the end as he was in the beginning. Prior to meeting with Mark, Kurt and the society had done some preliminary research on the history of the property, just to see if there could have been any reason for it to be haunted. And what they found was that the home was originally built in 1741 by a sea captain that was active in the slave trade in the West Indies, and that slaves were indeed kept at the property. Mark then decides to play Kurt the EVPs that he had captured. Chillingly, they together identify roughly 6 distinct voices throughout them. Combining the historical knowledge, Mark's genuine testimony, and his disturbing EVPs, Kurt decides that the team needs to investigate. But will they uncover the source of the paranormal torment and solve this crisis once and for all? Several days later, Kurt and his paranormal team arrive to begin the investigation. Alongside team members and their array of gear including cameras, sensors, and digital recorders, Kurt has also brought along the group's psychic, a woman named Karen Hollis. Karen's first impression of the home was that the atmosphere seemed to teem with a heaviness, like an oppressive smog. To begin the investigation, the team places devices and members on every level of the house to attempt to be successful in capturing additional EVP recordings. As they call out questions to the presence, Karen, who finds her way to the basement, can't help but notice that the energy seems to be coalescing around the old well in the middle of the room. In her words, "As I stepped closer to it, I realized that this was more than a well. It was deep and dark and foreboding." As she peers into its depths, a sudden burst of energy hits her in the chest from the opening. She is suddenly overcome with a deep sense of dread and anxiety. She then begins to experience a vision. In that vision, she felt the presence of a little girl come into her body. The little girl was once a slave and was concerned about her mother, who had been taken away to see a doctor because she was sick and sadly never returned. The poor child never knew what happened to her. Within several seconds, she feels the presence leave. Karen is now convinced that the well that stands before her isn't just that. It's a portal between this world and the next, a vortex where many souls were coming and going, entities that were both good and bad. Unaware of Karen's experience in the basement, Kurt and other team members are in the attic conducting their own segment of the investigation. Here, they come across the voodoo altar and symbols. They can immediately sense evil radiating from them. Within hours, the team decides to pack up their gear and take their findings back to the central office to comb through just what they had captured. Among many photos and EVPs, they came to the conclusion that the home has been a harbor for lost souls since its inception, and that when Ashley and her friends conducted their ritual in the attic, that instead of banishing spirits, they conjured up dark, potentially demonic forces, which then made their way into the home through the portal within the old well. Upon their convictions, Kurt and Karen visit Mark once again at his home and explain their findings to him. Karen, who has had a feeling about Mark, decides to question him about his childhood within the house. Mark, who hadn't shared this previously, discusses with her that he had experienced a few strange things in the house growing up, such as hearing footsteps, seeing objects move, and oddly, that he would sleepwalk and typically be found just feet away from the old well. Karen, given this information, believes that Mark is an empath, which means that he can see and experience spirits. However, this means for him that if he wants to continue to live in the home, that he would have to get used to seeing and interacting with all aspects of the spirit world, and even those that would seek to harm him. Although there would be no way to fully cleanse the property, or so they believed, they did counsel Mark in just what he could do to protect himself and manage living in the house, including telling him not to antagonize or engage with them. Following this advice, Karen and Kurt would depart. In the days to come, Mark takes the team's advice and does what he can, deciding to further concentrate on renovating the house to keep his mind off things. He finds himself on a ladder fixing the gutters on the roof. As he hammers away, he begins feeling the presence of evil surrounding him. Becoming angry, he decides to challenge just whatever these things were, unfortunately, ignoring the team's advice. Amidst his yelling, the ladder is suddenly yanked backwards and Mark falls. Given the height of the fall, he breaks his back and, according to the doctors, should have died. He spends the next 3 weeks in the hospital and then returns back to that very house. Seeing his anger as being his downfall, literally, Mark decides to alter his perspective on the entire situation and to reform his outlook to be more positive. He does this by remaining steadfast in his personal faith. Despite the terrifying encounters with the paranormal presence that lurked within the walls of his house, Mark Corvo decides to continue living there. Perhaps he too will join them one day. Before we go, I did want to share some interesting details about this case. First off, a good chunk of this information in particular I'm citing from the Ghosts of New England Research Society's website, which I'll link below in regards to the case. The original owner of the house, the sea captain, was named William Rainey, which is where the house gets its name from. Now, I'm not sure if Mark still lives there or not, or if it's just a historical site now. Therefore, I'm not going to list the address, and please, as always, respect everyone's privacy when it comes to any case that I cover here, and really just in general. I cannot stress that enough. So it turns out that Max Corvo, Mark's father, bought the home in 1959 and lived there until 2009, presumably when he passed. And back in 1959, as part of the renovations that were done back then, he put in a new septic system. And during that process, while they were digging the trench out to, presumably replace the septic system, they found 20 very old graves on the property. and I very much think that this could have absolutely contributed to the haunting. Interestingly, when I was doing some of my digging just to see perhaps if I could find any additional updates, I did see that Mark actually gave a interview, or at least a comment, to the local press about another home that was tied to a true crime case where there was a murder that occurred, and I believe that they dug up several bodies at a neighboring house to Mark's residence. And basically he said, and I quote, "There's a lot of negative energy and bad vibrations that came from the ownership of the house." And this was back in 2016. Now, I tried to find updates on Mark, but again, he very well may live in the same residence and might just keep a low profile in his golden years. So therefore, again, please do not bother him and be respectful of his privacy. And I hope wherever he is that he's doing well. And I hope I covered his case with the utmost respect and that I did his story justice. The website mentioned as well, which I'll link below, has a good amount of photos from the actual investigation, as well as a bunch of additional information. And I'm also going to put some other websites that I cited during my study of this case. I'll link all of those down in the description. Now, I think the home was already haunted, but perhaps not as haunted or infested with any kind of negative entities as when Ashley brought in the voodoo practitioners. I think it's very possible that they could have conjured something and or allowed for these entities to enter the home through what they had done. This story has been featured on several platforms, including one of my all-time favorites, a show called A Haunting, which I cite fairly regularly. I've definitely done a good amount of cases from that show, but I just enjoy watching it. It's just one of my personal favorites, truth be told. But I had an absolute blast delving back into this episode alongside my other resources in order to fully study and just kind of hash the whole story out. So with that being said, please let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please leave it a like, hype it if you can. Obviously the comment helps a ton, and subscribe if you're new here. All those things help me out tremendously. Now, I've noticed that on YouTube, my Shopify store, my main merchandise site, is currently broken, and I'm trying to get that fixed as far as how it's linked to YouTube. But you can still purchase my books or merchandise just directly from the site, which is mysteryarchives.store. With that being said as well, if you want to further support my work, you can check out my Patreon, and at tier 2 or higher, which I believe I have at $5 a month right now, you can get all my content ad-free, as well as some behind the scenes stuff. So you might check that out at patreon.com/mysteryarchives. I've definitely still had a lot of stuff going on in my personal life, but I've really seen a pretty big turnaround, I think, just in my overall morale and mood. And I've just had a lot of fun returning to my roots, and I've really been enjoying writing again lately. And I hope you guys can kind of see the difference in the content that I'm producing. And I say this a ton, so I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I will forever be grateful for all the support that you guys give me. So thank you so very much for allowing me to be able to tell you stories for a living, because I'm beyond honored. As always, guys, this has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Make sure to stay safe out there and take care. I'll see you next time.